Hi everyone, welcome to this Capture One webinar. Thank you all for signing up and thanks to Wex for hosting us once again. My name is María Pérez-Cejuela and I'm a Capture One trainer and a channel manager. I will be your host today and I hope to guide you around some of the cool tools in Capture One through some live edits. I will be editing some of your photos today that you kindly submitted for this. Thank you all who submitted the photos. I couldn't unfortunately include them all, but I hope that you are watching the authors of the photos and that you're going to like my proposal for a raw edit. So I wanted to start by explaining the session today. This is actually a follow-up of the first session that we had here at Wex's YouTube channel a couple of weeks ago that was about getting started with Capture One. And today I wanted to go a bit deeper into some aspects like layer edits, which I think could be interesting for you. I wanted to show you a little presentation just for you to keep in mind what we're going to have today. And by the way, the first session is recorded right here at Wex's YouTube channel, so if you didn't watch it back then I propose you to watch it now. It might be full of some useful stuff for you. So today we're going to have around 15 minutes for the live edits, and then in the end I will leave 15 minutes for questions and answers. As you know, this is a pre-recorded webinar, but I will be right there with you on the chat to answer all of your questions as we go. So this webinar will also be recorded, staying on Wex's channel. You can ask all of the questions as we go or back in the end with the 15 minutes for questions and answers. And you can enjoy the chat, you can interact between each other, and also Matt from Wex is kindly there at the chat with us too to answer some of your questions. I wanted to remind you that we started a campaign with a hashtag support your local dealer. So if you want to get your Capture One license, you can do that from Wex's online shop, and you can use this hashtag on the social media, and I'm sure that we will all be very happy to see that you are supporting your local businesses. So let's go right ahead to the Capture One interface. This is some of the files that I prepared for today. I hope you're going to like my edits. This is already the edited versions. But right now I'm going to restart these photos and I'm going to start from the beginning so you can see all of the process. So I'm going to hide myself for a while. I will see you back in the end. So this is the first image I prepared for you today. We have a portrait of one of these Sphinx cats with all of these textures on the skin, and this is what I wanted to highlight with this edit. This is of course the black and white edited version. This is the before of the photo, this is the raw file, and we're going to see the whole process. So I'm just going to come right here at the reset button. I'm just going to click it, and this is the raw file without my cropping. All right, so you can see here, there is no adjustments. We're going to start this from the beginning. So first of all, I want to crop my photo to get some of the attention to the eyes and to this nice big pointy ears. So I take my cropping tool from right here. I'm just going to keep the original proportions of the photo, something like that. Okay. So I go ahead and click enter, and this is my cropping. I can just take the tool again and adjust it as many times as I need to. And remember that as Capture One is a raw editor, it's not destructive edit, and you can always go back to what you had before. Capture One will never replace any of the existing information. Okay, so I think this would be our cropping. Just maybe I will do it a tiny bit more open, like there. All right, I think this is a nice cropping. And I'm going to go ahead and start by selecting my black and white tool right here. I'm going to enable my black and white tool. The black and white tool is one of the few tools that is not yet supported in layers, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this on the background layer, and from then on I'm going to create my layers to work on them as a background, because so I can have the opacity control right here. But this is not possible in the black and white tool. I'm just going to enable it, which I did already, and then I can just play around and try to bring some contrast back to this photo. It was kind of washed, so let's see what we have here on this color splitting. Okay, I think that to bring out the texture, I will have to bring down the reds. The rest is mostly the skin tones, also for this cat, as you can see. So if I take down the reds, you can see that I am bringing out some of the contrast in this image. This is the before of the tool. This is the after. And you can see how that is working. And let's just do the same with the rest of the tones here. So if I bring up the yellows, we can see that this part here is coming up, and I think that also here we want to just bring it down, and the idea here is to make the textures pop up and the eyes really pop out of the rest of the face. something like that. Let's see. There's nothing on the greens here. I will just leave it around 0. And the cyans will probably have some information of the eyes. Yeah, that's it. So I want to come up with my cyans and just, yeah, something like that, and just to make the eyes brighter. Let's see what's happening with the blues. Okay, the blues I think I can also take up. Something like that, for the same reason as the cyans. And the magentas. Okay, the magentas is also some little bit of information here, but also something on the eyes. So if we take a closer look here, it's more about the black part of the eye. So I think it's better here to bring it a bit down, just to make sure that these eyes are not so narrow and it looks a bit more friendly. Something like that. Okay, let's see the before and after of the tool. By doing by holding the Alt key and pressing on this button, I can see the before, and when I let go, I can see the after. I think I went maybe a bit too far on the reds and the yellows, but we can correct that as we go. It's not a problem. Maybe a bit more on the blues, on cyans. Okay, I think that would be it. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I think that this is a good starting point, and from now on I'm going to be working in layers. So I will create my first layer. It's going to be a new fill adjustment layer. Okay, it's a fill layer because if I press M, I can see that there is already a mask that exists and it's taking up all of the whole photo, and my adjustments will be applied to the whole photo, and this is exactly what I want. So I'm just going to call this BG because this I'm going to treat as my background. Okay, so from here I'm going to do my basic adjustments. Okay, I'm going to go a tiny bit up on the exposure. You can just slide up and down, but to be super precise, I like to just click here and go up and down with my arrows. Both things are okay. So up with the exposure a bit, I'm going to add extra contrast, and I'm going to do this on the curves. We could do this on the levels, for example, and this is a more simple way to get started if you are not familiar with raw edits. But I do like to use my curves, especially the Luma curve here on the black and whites, because I can get a really fine control of the contrast without affecting and bringing out any weird color dominance. So something like that would be some nice contrast. And even if you don't want to work with curves and levels, you could do this just by sliding up and down on the contrast slider, and that is of course working well. Okay, I think I'm quite happy here. I think I will just bring up my whites a bit more, just like that. And just now I can recover a bit of my highlights because I like this contrast, but when we are raising the contrast too much on the curves, we are losing some of detail here. So I'm going to just go down on my highlights and try to recover some of this information here. Let's see. I think that we are fine over there. We can just keep seeing the before and after because I think it's important to keep track of the process, because otherwise we can become too alienated of the original and we don't want that, of course. There's a big difference here, of course, because of the black and white, but I think we just have to stick to the flow of the image. Okay, I think this is doing a nice job. Maybe I will just come up with my shadows just a tiny bit to take back some of this detail from these hairs here. Okay, I think this is a good basis, and if I went too far with any of my adjustments, I can just take down my opacity control here, and I can just stay in any point in the middle. I think that for now we are fine at 100%, and if with the adjustments later we just need to go back to this, it's just very easy to do so, and this is why I like to do all my adjustments in layers always that it's possible. Okay, let's just move on to the next layer. I want to highlight a bit of the eyes here. I'm just going to zoom in a bit so you can see it. This cat has some very nice eyes, and we can bring back some of the texture here on these eyes, and we can do this in a very simple way just by adding some extra sharpening, and I'm going to add also some structure. So I'm going to just create another layer. This time it's going to be an empty layer. I'm going to call it eyes. And I'm just going to draw my mask. If I press M, you can see now that there is nothing coming up because there is no mask created. So I'm just going to take my brush tool. This is one of the ways to start working with layers, just in a very simple way with the brushing tools. And you can just use your brush settings here just by right clicking on the image. You get the brush settings window. You can just play around with the size and the hardness, and the opacity and the flow I will leave for the end. Okay, so let's just paint our mask. It doesn't matter if it's not super precise, because as we are doing only sharpening and structure adjustments, it won't be so obvious if we are a bit out of the eye. If we were doing some exposure adjustments, we would need to be a bit more careful, and this is why we also have advanced masking tools. I will try to show you later. So, okay, right now, because I have this on a different mask, if I did any kind of adjustment here, it will be applied only to this layer. I don't want to use my exposure now, I just wanted it to be very obvious. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add some extra sharpening here, something around 170, 180. Yeah, I think that's fine. We can see also the before and after of a single layer just by unclicking it here. This is without this sharpening, and this is with the sharpening, and you can see how we have a nicer detail here. For this kind of adjustment, I also like to use my structure slider. The clarity in Capture One is really nice to use because you have different methods for clarity, and then you have also a structure slider. Okay, so I can just bring it up, and what structure is doing, it's affecting the micro contrast, and this gives somehow a feeling of sharpness. It's not adding sharpness really, it's just increasing micro contrast, but it does help to bring out the details and the textures on the image. And I really like to use it locally, just as here. I'm not really a big fan of structure for the whole image, because then these parts of the image that are out of focus, they would start to look a bit weird. But I think that we have a nice image here. So I think I will add a bit more of clarity to the overall image on the background. Not structure, only a tiny bit of clarity. Normally with the clarity, I like to check all of the modes and see which one fits the image the best. This punch mode is sometimes a bit too aggressive. I think it here will be too aggressive. But it's really nice, for example, for landscape edits, because it also brings out a bit of the saturation. I think the natural mode is fine here. And you can see just by seeing the before and after of the tool, how it helps bring us some of the contrast here on this neck. I think that's fine. And we can move on now to the next adjustment. I'm somehow annoyed by these small hairs and details here that are kind of out of place. So I can heal this very easily with the new healing tool in Capture One, which I really love. And right now it's super simple to use. I just need to take my healing brush, which is right here next to my other brushes. I'm just taking this brush and I can just adjust it like here, and it magically goes out. I'm just going to set the display arrows option so you can see what exactly it's doing. So as you saw, I just painted here and it took automatically the source point, and it did a really nice job. For example, here, if I want to take a very concrete source point, I can select that manually too, just by looking for one that will fit here. Like for example here, I think it will be a nice source point. I can just set it by holding Alt and clicking on the point of the image that I want to use, and then I can paint again here on this part of the image that I want to get rid of, and it will just replace it automatically, and it will also match the saturation. There is no saturation in this case, of course, but it will match the luminosity settings from one source point to the other, to the surrounding luminosity and colors, and it will just make it look the same. So you can see now that it did a really nice job, and we got rid of these small defects on the hair without a big effort. I think that we can refine this a bit just by deleting some of this mask around this area maybe. I think that's better. Yeah. Okay, so you can see we have a lot of flexibility here, and right now with the healing layers in Capture One, you can do as many heals per layer as you want. Just going to call this heal hairs. I like to name all of my layers because then I'm sometimes working with many of them and it gets messy if you don't, so I recommend you to do this. And I think that we will be almost done here. I wanted to start by a very simple edit just for you to keep track of what I'm doing. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a vignetting. I like to add a vignetting in most of my photos because I think it gives a really nice feeling of depth. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to do this, as always, on another layer just to have a separate control of what I'm doing. I'm going to create a new layer. This time it's going to be empty as well. You can see, no mask. I'm going to call it vignette. And the best way to do this, in my opinion, is just to use the radial gradient mask, which is right here next to my other tools. So you can see on this layer panel that it's really easy to use right now because we have all of the brushes here. We have the eraser tool here and some of the masking options, and it's just very intuitive right now. I'm just going to grab my radial mask. I'm going to draw it like this. I'm going to press M to see exactly what I'm doing. I can adjust the feathering just by dragging the inner circle. I think something like there. I can just make it narrower or wider or taller, and I can just control the overall size by dragging the outer circle. I think that we're going to be fine around this. I'm going to press M. So the easy way to adjust the vignetting is just to come down a bit with the exposure and a bit down on the brightness, and this is something I do most of the times, and you can see that it adds a nice effect. We can just see the before and after of the vignette. I think it does a nice job here, but for this kind of vignette, for this white background, I wanted to have a somehow more dreamy look, so this is why I won't be doing it this way. So I'm just resetting my exposure tool. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to work from the levels. And I can just, on the levels, the right point represents the whites, and I can just increase my whites. And the point on the left represents the blacks, so I can just come up with my blacks. But what I'm going to do in this way is I'm going to work with the output levels, which are right here on the top. And these ones, you won't be using them often. But I think that for this concrete image, it's a good idea to play around with the output white level. And I can just somehow bring down my whites in a way like it's veiled, like a negative or something like that. I think it's somehow more dreamy, something like this. Let's see the before and after. You see what I mean? It's really subtle, it's really dreamy, but I think it gives a really nice effect. And as we were trying to achieve this dreamy look with the black and white, I think that this image could also use some grain. This is something that we didn't talk about in the last webinar, but we have also the option to add film grain in Capture One. This tool we have to use also from the background because it's not yet compatible with layers. And it's right here next to the sharpening. We have also the option film grain. And we have different types of grain, which I really love. And I'm just going to increase the impact, which is basically the grain opacity. And let's see what we are doing exactly. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit with my hand tool, just to see what we are doing. You can see that the grain is starting to show up here. Okay, let's just keep it around 50%, 60% even, just to see exactly what type of grain we're adding. And I like to try all of them before I decide for any. I really like the silver rich grain. Then we have the soft grain, we have some different types of grain. And the lower you go in the menu, the harsher it becomes. I really don't like this one. I think this one is too harsh. I think we can use soft grain here, a little bit down on the impact, on the opacity. And this is the granularity, So it's the grain size. Let's keep it around 60%, for example. Something like that, a bit more subtle. Okay, I think that we are fine there. If we see the whole of the image, we can see this grain texture added up here on the background without it being too noticeable. I think this is the perfect example for this. Okay, I think I'm finished with this image. As I said, this is very simple. We just have here 4 layers. That's nothing really. And we're going to move on to the next example. And for this, I have this nice photo of the apartment sent by Paul McGucking. Thank you, Paul. I hope you're watching us today and that you like my proposal for edit. So this is my edited version of the photo. I guess that this is some kind of real estate image, to maybe some Airbnb, something like that. And we must keep it close to reality because otherwise when the people would go and see this apartment, they would say, okay, this is not what was on the photos. So we have to keep it close to reality. But I think that in the same time, we can throw in some warmth and make it look a bit more like a home if this is something that we are expecting people to like. So this is the original photo. You can see that it has some kind of green dominance, cyan dominance, probably also the reflections from this cupboard here. There is a lot of cyan furniture, and this is somehow throwing this dominant, this kind of greenish, and I think it doesn't look too comfortable for home. So this is my proposal. Nothing too drastic, but just increasing the overall atmosphere of the place. That was my idea behind this edit. So I'm just going to reset this photo, and I'm going to start working from my original. First of all, I'm going to work on the background. So I won't do this on the background of the capture one. I just create a new fill adjustment layer, and just as I did before, I will treat it as my background with a mask that is affecting all of the image. Something like that. Alright, so I think that the first thing that we need to look at here is the white balance. Because of this greenish cyan dominant, it took a weird color. So I'm just going to select a neutral point on the image. Let's just check, for example, I guess that this clock should be white. So I'm just going to take my picker, my dropper, my picker, my dropper. I don't know, forgive me, I'm not an English native speaker. But I guess that you can understand me anyways. Okay, this would be the neutral normalized aspect of the image. I probably don't want it so much neutral, so I'm just going to go a bit warmer here without coming back to what we used to have. Something around there. And I think that would be a nice starting point. Let's just see the before and after. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to keep this neutral tone. I'm just using it as a starting point, and then from this neutrality, I will build my own colors for this image. I think that we're going to also give it some contrast. I will do this again from the Luma curve. If you remember from the last webinar, the difference between the RGB curve and the Luma curve is that the RGB curve is affecting not only the contrast and the brightness, but also the colors. So if I did some drastic curve like this, you can see how my colors are getting saturated. And I don't want to do this. Remember that I want to work from this neutrality. So I'm just using the Luma curve here to increase a bit of contrast. Don't worry if we are losing so many highlights here, because this is something that I will get back to in the end. I just want to concentrate now on the overall feel of the image, and then I will work locally. Also, don't worry about the windows. I have a different plan for the windows. I'm going to let you know in a moment. So I think this can be a nice starting point. I'm just going to bring back some of my shadows too, to keep the detail on this wooden floor and on this table. Let's do something like that. I really like to work with the contrast and the shadow recovery because it allows me to keep a very contrasted image that is not looking flat, but in the same time keep all my detail on the shadows. So I think we are good here. Probably also some clarity. What clarity is doing is adding some contrast, but only on the midtones. So without affecting the whole feel of the image, it will give a nice pop-up feeling. It will throw in some nice volumes. So we are good here, I think. Let's see the before and after. Remember to keep doing this, just not to lose track where we are coming from. So just very subtle, I just work with my contrast and I just work with my white balance. And from here on, I'm going to build. So I think that for you to keep track of what I'm doing, the best thing now is to create another fill layer and work straight with color so you can see what I mean. I created another layer and I'm going to call it color balance because this is a tool that I'm going to be working with right now. This is my mask. As always, it's a filled mask. And I'm going to come over to my color balance tool and I'm going to start creating the feel that I want to add to this image. So some kind of homey tones, a bit warm. So for the shadows, I don't like to throw red or orange into my shadows because it looks... Okay, there is adjustments for every image, but it looks kind of unnatural because in the real life, actually, shadows have cooler tones, so I don't really like this. And if I want to throw some warmth into the shadows, instead of doing this from the blues, we can do some kind of purples, which are somehow in between the magentas and the blues. And I think the purple in the shadows really works well in this kind of image. Something like there. We can go a bit further and then we can just reduce opacity. It's not important. I just want to have here the general feel of the image. And then when we are adding a cooler tone to our shadows, we want to work also with our highlights and add some warmer tones. Probably some yellows. Yeah, that's it. Maybe a bit more orangey. Okay, something like there. And so we are compensating, but we are creating this dominance from the scratch. We are creating this dominance ourselves. We are not relying on what the raw file had. We parted from this neutrality, and from here we are building the colors as we want to do it. I think that probably we are lacking some warmth still on the midtones, and on the midtones we can add a bit of reds or oranges, and it will look better, in my opinion, than on the shadows. But of course, color is very subjective, so if you think that goes better, then you are very welcome to do so. It's just a very subjective perspective. I think that we would be good with this color balance here. Yeah, I like the feel of the image. And then what are we doing with the windows? Okay, because we have here, let's see the before and after. We have here some blown information, and I'm sure if I went here to my background, we could probably recover much of it, as you can see. But the question here is, do we really want to recover this part of the image? What this information is adding up to the image? We are showing the apartment, okay? We might want to keep it contextualized in, I don't know, if it's in front of the park or something like that. But we have, on the other hand, very dirty windows, and I don't think this adds anything positive to our image. So what I'm going to do is exactly the opposite. I'm going to recreate some kind of, because if we also see the original, it looks like somehow flat day. We have some light coming in here from the windows, casting some shadows. But out here it's kind of flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recreate some kind of sunset light. I'm going to blow up the windows just a bit more, add some exposure, some brightness, and some of this yellow light, and just to have it fill the room. So I'm going to do this separately in two different masks. I'm going to create a new empty adjustment layer. I'm going to call it window 1, which is this one here, for example. And remember, there is no mask. I have to create it myself. And in this way, I'm going to do it just like I did before with a radial mask. But this time I will draw it inside. Because if I click M right now, you can see that it's outside of the circle. I want it inside. So I will just come here to my layer, right click it, and then select invert mask. And there it's inverted, and I can just select how I want to work with. So I want a very localized mask here on the window and affecting gradually on the outside. Of course, we cannot limit it just to the window because otherwise this would look pretty unnatural, but we can do something like that. Just a bit narrower, something like there. So once I have created my mask, I'm just going to click M to stop saying it. I'm going to change my tools so I won't have the circles bothering around. And I'm going to just increase my exposure. Don't worry if we go too far, we can always come back to what we had. And I'm going to adjust the brightness. I'm going to bring it really, really up because, as I said, I don't care of what's outside this window. I just care of the inside right now. And I want this to add this feeling of light coming through the window. So something like there. We can also, we have some shadows over there that we can just maybe, okay, yeah, okay. I'm just going to try to keep a little bit of detail on these window frames here. Something like there. Okay. And then in order to make it realistic, we have to match it with the color that we added to the general background. So I'm going to come to my color balance tool again, just on the highlights because it's basically what we have here, and add this kind of yellow tone to the lights, not so greenish, a bit more orange. And I think that it's looking good. This is a kind of adjustment where you want to go really far and then just tune down the opacity, because it's about achieving the balance between all of the adjustments. And I think that we did it here, and we just want to balance it with the original. I think that we are fine over there. And we're going to recreate exactly the same thing on the other window. So we create a new mask. Let's call it window 2. And again, with the radial gradient, we can just create a very similar mask. something like there. Let's see, let's click the M, and of course we need to right click, invert. Okay, we want it more to affect more the right side of the window than the left one, because we have of course this wall that would be covering this light. I think something like there. And we're going to do similar adjustments. So first of all, up with the exposure, something like there, up with the brightness. All right, and in the same way, just a nice color on this light coming through the window. Something like there, and then again we tune it down to 60%. Let's see the before and after of these layers. So this was without our flares through the window. This is with our flares through the window. I think that's looking quite natural. Probably we just need to reduce this a bit more. But then of course we are creating a problem here, because we raised the overall contrast, we added some flares through the window, and that's making us have some parts of the image that are a bit blown. So for example, here we are not having much detail, or here we are lacking some detail on the table. So we're going to try to bring in this detail locally, because if I just go to the background and I recover the highlights for the whole image, then everything that we did here, it gets kind of spoiled. So I will just do it locally. And I'm going to gradually paint a mask, which is something I really like to do for my advanced adjustments. Just going to create an empty mask and work a bit with my brush. So I'm going to start from a fill layer, but then I'm going to just invert it. Let's see, let's just add let's just give it a name, recover highlights. Okay, and you can see that the mask is affecting all of the image, but because I just want to see how much I'm recovering. So I'm just going to bring down my highlights. Don't worry about the windows, just focus here on what we want to recover actually. So let's do something like there, a bit down on the whites too. So you can see that this is a pretty aggressive adjustment. And now that I selected the kind of adjustment that I want, I'm just going to press M so you can see it better. The adjustment is here, okay? I'm just going to invert my mask. That's going to make it go away because it's inverted. The opposite is no mask. But the adjustments are still here. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to paint them in gradually. I will choose a lower opacity and a lower flow. The flow, what it's doing is that it's adjusting the number of times that I have to go through the side to the part of the image, so I can paint my mask in gradually and not all the way through. So I'm just going a bit closer. Let's start by here, for example, and I'm just taking my brush with my lower opacity and flow adjustments, and I can just, okay, this is the mask. You can see that it's appearing gradually. It's going to go back, Command Z, and I just select not to see it by clicking M, and then you can see that I'm starting to bring, okay, I will just tune it a bit up so you can see it more clearly. You can see how I'm bringing up the detail here in a very gradual way, and the more I go through it, the more detail I bring. I think this is something great when you want to do advanced masks. And then if I press M, we can see that we have different kind of mask opacity according to how many times we are doing this adjustment on the same part of the image. I think this is great, and this creates really natural masks. So just by doing this, I'm going to paint where I want to bring some of my detail back. Something like there. We want to bring also back this toaster, this part of the wall. You can see that it's all coming up. So for example, here on the cupboard, I want to bring it back, but more on this side than on the other because it's closer to the window. Also here, I'm going to reduce my size. And this is a bit of how we are working here. So I can just do this as many times as I need to. For example, like that, I think it looks nice. And just the last part of the image, which was right here, up with my size again. And just brushing it in and trying to bring back the detail on this table. Just going to go a bit lower in the opacity now. not so much. Okay, this is the hardness. Okay, hardness is fine around there. So I'm just bringing, here I have to be careful because it's really close to the window and we want to keep a nice balance between what is there and what is not there. So like that, my coffee maker, my cups, and just a tiny bit on this wall near the window. Okay, a bit up with my size, and that's how it would be done. That's a bit too much, just going down with my opacity a bit more. Okay, I think that would be it. Let's see the global before and the after. So you can see that we had this green dominant, this not so contrasted raw file. And here we have nice contrast, nice color, and nice lights coming through the window. We can just come up here and make it a bit more obvious if we want to. We can also toggle down the opacity of our highlight recovery to make it more natural. And this is my proposal for this raw file. I hope you like it, Paul. If you are watching us, you can comment about it. You're very welcome to do so. Okay, so let's move on to our next image. I think it will be the last one for today. And we have this nice image sent by John Ferguson. Thank you, John, for submitting your raw file. And this is my proposed edit. So for this image, I wanted to do a bit more kind of a dreamy cinematic edit based on what this image inspired to me. And in my case, I'm a very big fan of Doctor Who, and this image and her just kind of reminded me to the new Doctor Who looks. It's not like she looks like the actress, but it was just the feel of it. And, you know, with this suit and everything, and I could almost see the TARDIS here on the right out of frame. So I took this inspiration as a basis for my edit, and sometimes you just need to see what this image is inspiring you and take that as a basis for the situation that you want to recreate. Okay, so this is my edit, and I'm just going to reset it so you can see the original image. This is the original, and from here on we're going to be working. Okay, so the first thing I did in order to achieve this kind of cinematic look is we need to do a crop in 16:9 format because it's panoramic, like for the TV and the cinema. So just taking my cropping tool, and by pressing and holding I can see here all of these aspect ratios. I just chose this one and I did my cropping right here. So something like there. Okay, I think that we are good over here, and this is going to be our crop to start working from. And just as I did before, I'm just going to build this up on layers. So I'm going to create a new fill adjustment layer. Just as before, I treat it as my background. And what I'm going to do here is to recreate a whole different lighting setup and to try to see and to try to look for these Doctor Who looks just by working with light and color. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to make this image a bit darker, okay? So I'm going to reduce the exposure. You will see how this is building up on the layers, okay? So you won't see the results coming up right now, but I promise you that it comes up eventually. So done with the exposure, done with the brightness. We're going to start from a very, very dark image, and then we will add this flare on the right as if it was coming from the TARDIS or any source of light. Okay, you don't need to like Doctor Who. So we're going down with my saturation, something like there. I'm going to start creating this moody, desaturated, dark look, and from here on we will be working. I would also like to add a bit of contrast, and I do this just as I did before from my Luma curve because I want to keep the desaturated feeling. If I did this from the RGB curve, I would get more saturation, and I don't want that right now. Okay, so something like that. And there is also an adjustment I really like to do when I'm creating the cinematic look, and I do this from the color balance, but it's not related with color, okay? Because here in the color balance you have also control of the highlights and the shadows and the midtones, just as you would have on a video editing software and on a color grading software for video. And I love to work with this kind of sliders here, and I like to go up with my blacks. And even if the contrast won't be perfect, we have this kind of, you can see this cinematic look with the veiled blacks. I just really like this when I'm doing this kind of edit. So I'm going to keep it higher like this. So I think this is a nice starting point. I'm just going to build up on here. The next thing I want to do is I want to work with my colors, with my color editor. And I'm going to create a new fill adjustment layer. I'm just going to name it color editor because it's the tool that I will be using right now. And I'm going to work from the advanced color editor. So I can pick any of my tones separately. So I'm just going to take my dropper and I'm going to select a color sample from any of these bricks, for example this one, and that will be our color selection. And if we click this option to view the selected color range, just like so, you can see that we have a perfect selection of the bricks, but we have also selected her skin tone and some of the roses up here. The roses I don't care so much, but I don't want to affect the skin tone here. So this is why we can just reduce the color selection and make it match the color that we want to work with. So the center of the wheel represents the least saturated colors, while the outer part of the wheel represents the most saturated. And as the bricks are more saturated than her skin tone, we can just reduce the selection from the desaturated color, just like so. And you can see that we have now a refined selection of the bricks. I don't care so much about the flowers here. Maybe I can just take down the daisies from reducing the yellow range. Okay, and we have still a very nice brick selection without affecting so much of the rest. So now that we have a good selection of the color range, we can start working with the hue, the saturation and the lightness. First thing I want to do is I'm going to play around with the tone. I want to make it a bit more greenish, not so magenta. So I think it will just look better with the whole feel of the image. And I'm going to desaturate it a bit so it won't get so much attention. So let's do something like there, probably. Yeah, okay, I think that would be a good starting point. And as we don't have so much brightness and saturation on the reds, then it will make her somehow pop out of the background. I think that's good. Then I want to play also with these greens because these are way too saturated. So I have my dropper selected. I can just take another sample from my greens, and you can see here that a new color range is appearing right here under the previous one. And again we see the selected color range. It's probably this one a bit too strict, so let's just open it up a bit to other tones of green. Okay, I think that would be better. And just right now we have selected our greens and we can also work with them. I'm going to desaturate them a bit too and play around with the hue. This one, okay, this is a bit more yellow. I think that will be better to have a more yellow green, something like there. Okay, and then we could also play around a bit with these roses, so just another new color range right here. In this case we want to make it a bit wider too, just keeping in mind not to affect the skin tones which are close to these pinks. So let's do like this, and we can tackle that, like for example let's change the hue, let's make it a bit more reddish, something like there. We can saturate maybe just a tiny bit. And just lastly, for example, let's take these yellows. Let's see the selected color range. This one is affecting also the plants here. We don't want to affect the greens, just these yellows. We can also take out the least saturated parts to avoid changes on this wall, on the yellow parts, something like there. And I'm just going to make them a bit more green and a bit least saturated. Okay, this is a good color to keep working with. Let's see the before and after of the color. This is without the color editor adjustments. This is with the color editor adjustments. And somehow it might look to some of you more pleasing this way, but this is just a work in progress. We are not finished here. And it's just about the general feel of the image that we want to have. So before jumping ahead and working more with color, I'm going to add a very simple vignette just to start creating the atmosphere. Just a new adjustment layer. I call it vignette. And same way as I did before with my radial mask, I'm just going to create a mask like this that will, let's check pressing M. Okay, I think that's nice. Let's do it a bit less feathered, a bit harder, something like that. Okay, and now that I have this mask, I'm going to do this just in the simple way, just by tucking down the exposure and the brightness too. Okay, so now I will just reduce the opacity just a tiny bit, around 90%, so we have room to move back up again. And right now I will start focusing a bit more on color and on creating the lighting situation here. I'm just going to add a color grading layer first to have a basis of what the general color will be like. So new fill layer, I'm going to call it color grade, and I'm going to do this from the color balance, which is one of my favorite tools in Capture One. It just lets you work with color in such a simple, intuitive way. I really, really like it. So the shadows, I'm going to give them just like I did before with the apartment photo, a cooler tone, this time a bit more bluish, something like there. Maybe not so, maybe somehow in the way between blue and purple. This tone splitting is working in a very general way, so the shadows are a very wide range, the highlights are a very wide range. I just want to give the general blue feel to all the image. I will just compensate a bit on the highlights. This time I'm going to add, not so much, this time I'm going to add a more greenish yellow that is still warm, but somehow not so pleasant to the sight, because we are working here with a sci-fi look, so yeah, something like that. And this is just the general color of the image. And then I want to insist even more on this shadows, on this blue on the shadows. So I'm going to create a different layer, and this time I'm going to work with a really cool tool in Capture One, which is called the Luma Range. I'm going to show you how this works. So I'm going to create a new fill adjustment layer, just like that. I'm going to call it shadow color. It's really important that you start here from a fill layer, because the Luma Range tool is going to modify the existing layer. Okay, so I just click here on my Luma Range tool, and this dialog shows up, and this is a representation of the Luma Range of the image. So as always, on the left side is the blacks, on the right side is the whites. And this time I want to isolate my shadows, so I just need to play around with my Luma Range tool, and you can see that the mask is being modified, and it's leaving out all the pixels that don't have this luminosity range that I want to work with. I want to work with all of my blacks, just like that, and that will be more or less it. I'm just going to add some color to these shadows. I just want a smoother transition between the mask and the non-masks selection. So I can just increase the fall off here and a bit of the radius to create some kind of feather in the mask. Something like there. Yeah, that's better. Okay, I don't want to select any concrete object here. I just want to mask my shadows so I can give them a different color. Okay, so, no, that's too much. Yeah, okay. Let's go back to where we were, something there. And I just click apply, and there we are. This is our mask, and right now when I have this on a different mask, I can just work with my color balance in the master channel, which is working for all of the mask, and just tune up the blues, just like that. And you can see that it's subtle, but it's recognizable. Let's see the before and after of the mask. So you can notice, for example, here on this greenish tones, that we have this blue on the shadows that is giving us the dreamy feel. And I really like to do it in this way. And you could even create another Luma Range mask for the highlights and just be super precise. In this case, I think that it's okay just with the shadows. And now that I created here the global feel of my tones, I want to create the lighting situation. And the lighting situation is that we have a light source over here on the right side out of frame. And it's just casting some light on her, on our Doctor Who of today. So I'm just going to create this mask where it's going to imitate the light that will be coming from this light source, from the TARDIS, whatever. And I'm just going to call it Flare. And this time I'm going to work with a linear gradient mask right here. So I can just take my linear gradient tool. I'm going to draw this gradient. Let's click M to see what we are affecting. And the cool thing in Capture One with the gradient tools is that you can just be very, very precise on how it is affecting on the image, and you can control the fall off and the size. And if you press shift, for example, you can just increase the feathering of this mask. I think that would be nice, and just by clicking out we can just reduce and make somehow of an asymmetric mask, something like that. Okay, I think that I'm happy here, so I'm going to just press M. And as this is a flare and we need to create some light, I will need to go up with my exposure quite a lot. Let's go like a full step, something like that. And don't worry, I'm not just going to leave it just like that. I'm going to also increase the brightness because this is a light source over there. And of course I need to also give some color to my light, because otherwise it just looks like weird exposure coming from the right, and we need to give it color that will fit the rest of the image. So just from the color balance, working with my highlights now, I'm going to add the same color that I added to the global image. So this lime green. And I'm just going really crazy here. I think that's something like that. Okay, maybe just a bit bigger on the mask. And I know what you're thinking, this looks weird right now, but because there is nothing to balance this brightness here. So if we have the light source coming from here, that means that we need to create a darker background on this side of the image. And this is what we're going to do now. We're going to create another linear gradient mask that will compensate the light on this side. So, new layer, let's call it shadow. And I'm going to create somehow of the opposite feel on the other side. So another linear gradient tool. I'm creating my mask like this. Let's press M. Let's see what we are doing. And I'm just going to adjust this mask just to be very precise and to mix it in smoothly with these other mask on the right side. Let's do something like there for now, and then we can always remodel it. So click M, click V to get rid of my tool. And then we need to go down on the exposure just to compensate. Let's go down a full step, maybe. Maybe not so much, something like. Okay, that will be it more or less. And then we of course need to balance also the color, because we have this light color here with these greenish, yellowish. And then we need to match also the shadows here with the color that we used before. So just on the shadows, let's go to these blues and just put them up, something like there. Going to just adjust my mask a bit more to this side. And I think that this is way more balanced now. We just need to, I think, increase somehow this shadows on the downside of the frame. So I'm going to create a very similar mask just for the other side of the frame. Down, and just another mask, something like there. And in the same way as I did before, just going down with the exposure a bit. Something more like this. Down with the exposure, down with the brightness a bit more, and just matching the colors of the rest. Okay, so you can see now how we created here a light situation, completely different from what we used to have. So it's just a combination of these three layers here. You can see this is the flare. It just looked a bit weird just by watching that, but it's compensated here nicely with the shadows, and it's important that it matches the general lighting situation of the original. So we have here, let's just zoom in a bit on her face. We have here the light part and here the shadows, and we try to match this shadow light setup on our edit, and this is important to make it realistic. You can see here on the shade, like you have all of this light on her, and here she's on the shadows. So it's nice because it matches the original lighting, but we just modified it a bit because let's see the global before. It was somehow flat. You can see that it's probably the light of a cloudy day. And now we just gave it a more contrasted feeling with this flare and this darkness over here. And this is just my imagination of what this Doctor Who could be like. I know this is a very personal interpretation of this image based on my feels on it, but somehow image editing is also about the feels of the images and the feels that you want to transfer to these images, and I just see it as another part on the creative process of image creation. So I just wanted to take this license here to be a bit more creative. I don't know what John thinks of it. I hope you like it. So this was my last edit for today. I'm just going to come back to you briefly on this little square here, just to say thank you all for watching us today. Thanks to Matt from Wex also for being there on the chat to answer your questions. And don't leave just yet, because we have now the 15 minutes in the end for questions and answers. I wanted also to remind you that there is a 30-day free trial to Capture One that you can download at any time, so you can just try out the tools by yourselves. I hope that this webinar was useful for you to see my process of editing the photos and to see how I guide myself sometimes through feelings and how I apply these tools to my edits. So thank you all for watching, and remember that you can get your license from Wex and that we created this hashtag support your local dealer because we know it's important right now to support local businesses. So thanks everyone, and see you soon on the next Capture One webinar. Bye!